The digital clock on Sarah's nightstand blinked 10:47 p.m. in insistent red numbers. Outside, a persistent late autumn rain whispered against the window pane, a soothing, monotonous sound that usually helped her unwind. Tonight, however, it was just background noise to the mountain of student essays piled beside her on the bed. As a high school history teacher, Sarah's evenings were often a quiet communion with the past, analyzing the fall of empires, the follies of kings, the slow, grinding march of progress. She was a woman who appreciated order, precedent, and the clear, logical line connecting cause and effect. Her life, much like her lesson plans, was meticulously structured. Every dollar of her modest salary was accounted for, every goal charted on a spreadsheet, with the largest and most sacred of those goals being the down payment for a small condo, a tangible piece of independence she had been painstakingly building for the last 5 years. Her phone, lying face down on the duvet, suddenly vibrated with a jarring buzz that cut through the calm. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing slightly when she saw the name, Tom, her younger brother. A call from Tom this late on a weeknight was rarely good news. He was the chaotic, unpredictable variable in her well-ordered life, the charming, charismatic artist who lived in a perpetual state of almost making it big. At 28, 4 years her junior, he still possessed the boyish ability to make disastrous decisions seem like romantic adventures, and financial irresponsibility like a noble rejection of capitalist norms. She let it ring twice more, a small, weary sigh escaping her lips before she finally answered. "Tom, is everything okay?" "Tom? Oh, thank God you answered." The voice on the other end was a ragged, panicked thing she barely recognized. It was thick with a desperate static, stripped of its usual carefree swagger. The sound of it sent a jar of alarm straight through her. "Tom! What is it? You sound awful." She sat up straighter, the essays forgotten. "It's a disaster, Sar, a complete and utter disaster," he choked out, and she could hear a wet, gulping sound that might have been a sob. I'm getting evicted." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Evicted. It was a concept so alien to Sarah's carefully curated world that it felt like something from a movie. "What are you talking about? Your rent is due on the 1st. I thought you had that big freelance project that was paying well." "It fell through," he wailed, his voice cracking. "The client just ghosted me, pulled the plug at the last minute. I haven't been paid in 2 months, Sar. I've been trying to juggle things, moving money around, but I'm out of time. The landlord, he's a shark. He taped an eviction notice to my door this morning. I have until Friday. Friday, Sarah. If I don't give him what I owe, he's changing the locks and putting my stuff on the street." Sarah's mind, the organized, logical mind of a history teacher, started to spin. She tried to impose order on the chaos. "Okay, slow down. How much do you owe him?" "That's the thing," he sobbed, the sound raw and desperate. "It's not just this month. I'm 3 months behind. He was letting it slide because he knew I had that project coming in, but now he wants everything. 3 months rent plus late fees. It's almost $7,000. Sarah's heart sank. 7,000. It was an astronomical sum. "Tom, I don't have that kind of money just lying around." I know, and it gets worse," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, terrified whisper. "Even if I could pay him, I can't stay here. He wants me out. So I need the back rent, and I need a security deposit and first month's rent for a new place. I found a tiny studio, way cheaper, but I have to give them the deposit by Friday to hold it. Otherwise, I'm literally going to be homeless." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, pinching the bridge of her nose. Her condo fund, the sacred number she watched tick up with maternal pride every month, it was the only place such a sum of money existed in her universe. "How much, Tom? Exactly how much do you need?" $10,000, he whispered, the number landing like a physical blow. "I did the math. It's the bare minimum I need to not be on the street next week. $6,800 for the back rent and fees and $3,200 for the deposit and first month on the new place. $10,000. A cold, pragmatic voice in the back of her head started screaming warnings. This was Tom, charming, manipulative Tom, whose past emergencies had often turned out to be self-inflicted wounds born of impulse and a complete disregard for consequences. There was the emergency trip to Vegas that required a loan to cover his rent, the emergency camera equipment that was supposedly for a job that never materialized. But this felt different. The panic in his voice sounded so real, so visceral. He was a talented graphic designer, but was he that talented of an actor? Tom, this is a huge amount of money. Are you sure there's no other way? Can't you talk to the landlord, work out a payment plan? What about Mom and Dad? He won't budge. I told you he's a shark. And you know Mom and Dad. They'd just lecture me. They'd help maybe, but they'd make me feel like the world's biggest failure. And they don't have that kind of cash on hand anyway, not without dipping into their retirement. You are the only one I can turn to, Sarah. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was small, wounded, and expertly aimed at the softest parts of her heart. Remember what Dad always said before he passed? You two have to look out for each other. You're all you've got. Please, Sarah, you're my big sister. I've never been this scared in my life. The thought of all my art supplies, my computer, everything just sitting on a sidewalk in the rain. He broke off with a shuddering sob. That was the kill shot. Their father. The memory of his warm, steadying presence and his final earnest plea for them to protect one another. It was a sacred pact, a cornerstone of Sarah's identity. She was the responsible one, the protector. It was her role. She looked around her small, tidy apartment, the neat stacks of books, the framed historical maps on the wall, the cozy armchair where she read every night. It was her sanctuary. The thought of her brother, her baby brother, with no such sanctuary, of him being cast out and vulnerable, it was unbearable. Her gaze drifted to the corkboard above her desk. Pinned to it were photos of condos she'd found on Zillow, printouts of mortgage calculations, a timeline she'd drawn up. Goal, offer by August. It was her future, right there, pinned to a board. A future built on skipped vacations, brown bag lunches, and countless nights spent tutoring to earn extra cash. $10,000. It was almost the entire fund. It would set her back years. The dream, so close she could almost taste the new paint smell of her own walls, would recede into the distant horizon. But then she heard Tom's choked breathing on the other end of the line. She pictured him in his messy, chaotic apartment, surrounded by packing boxes he couldn't afford to move, the shame and fear closing in on him. How could she choose a dream of drywall and property taxes over the immediate safety of her own brother? Okay, she heard herself say, the word feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. Okay, Tom, I'll help you. A wave of what sounded like pure, unadulterated relief washed through the phone. You will? Oh, Sar, you're saving my life. You're literally saving my life. I promise I'll pay you back every single penny. I'll get a second job. I'll sell my plasma, whatever it takes. Just send me your account details, she said, her voice flat. She felt strangely hollowed out, as if the decision had scooped out something vital from her core. The money is in a high-yield savings account. I'll have to go to the bank in the morning to transfer it. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have no idea what this means. I love you, Sar. I love you too, Tom. She ended the call. She sat in the silence of her apartment, the rain now sounding less like a comfort and more like a lament. The pile of essays seemed to mock her with their tales of foolish kings and their ruinous decisions. She had just made a choice, a massive, life-altering choice based on a frantic 10-minute phone call. She had chosen her brother over her future, and as she stared at the pictures of condos pinned to her wall, she prayed with every fiber of her being that it was the right one. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, restless thing, populated by anxiety dreams of collapsing walls and emptying bank accounts. Sarah woke the next morning long before her alarm, a sour, metallic taste in her mouth and the heavy weight of her promise settling in her gut. The gray morning light filtering through her blinds seemed to match her mood, dull, oppressive, and devoid of color. The decision, made in the emotional crucible of a late-night phone call, felt starker and more terrifying in the cold light of day. She bypassed her usual morning routine of a quick run and a healthy breakfast. Her stomach was a tight knot of apprehension, and the thought of food was nauseating. Instead, she sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee, and stared at her laptop screen. On one tab was her online banking portal, displaying the beautiful, reassuring five-figure number she had worked so hard to accumulate: $10,842.17. It wasn't just money, it was a tangible representation of discipline, of sacrifice. It was every Friday night she'd stayed in, every generic brand she'd bought, every extra hour she'd worked. On another tab, she had the real estate listings she'd bookmarked: a charming one-bedroom with original hardwood floors, a top-floor unit with a small balcony perfect for a morning coffee. They were modest places, but they were hers. Or they were supposed to be. Clicking through the photos now felt like a form of self-torture. She was looking at a dream she was about to voluntarily dismantle. She tried to push the images away and replace them with the one that had driven her decision. Tom, scared and on the verge of homelessness. She had to believe in the righteousness of her choice. This was what family did. You showed up, you sacrificed. She repeated it to herself like a mantra, a shield against the rising tide of regret. The drive to the bank was a surreal blur. The familiar streets of her neighborhood seemed alien, as if she were viewing them through a distorted lens. At the bank, the cheerful morning bustle felt jarring. People were making deposits, applying for loans, building their futures. She was there to liquidate hers. She took a seat in the waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When her name was called, she walked toward the personal banker's desk on unsteady legs. The banker, a polished woman in her 40s named Miss Albright, greeted her with a warm smile. Sarah had spoken to her a few months prior about mortgage pre-approval, and Miss Albright remembered her. "Sarah, good to see you again," she said brightly. "Are you getting closer to making an offer? The market is finally starting to cool off a bit." The question felt like a punch to the stomach. "Actually," she said, her voice strained, "I'm here for something else. I need to close my high-yield savings account and transfer the funds." Miss Albright's professional smile faltered, replaced with a look of concern. "Oh, I see. Is everything all right? That account is tied to your house fund, if I remember correctly. You've been so diligent with it." "It's a family emergency," Sarah said, the words tasting like ash. She couldn't bring herself to elaborate, to give voice to the sordid details of Tom's alleged crisis. The shame of it felt like her own. Miss Albright nodded, her expression shifting to one of polite, professional discretion. "Of course, I understand." She turned to her computer, her fingers clicking on the keyboard. "There will be a small early withdrawal penalty as you haven't held the last deposit for the full 90 days. Are you aware of that?" "Yes, that's fine," Sarah said, waving a dismissive hand. "What was another $100 in the face of 10,000? The process was agonizingly slow. Forms were printed, signatures were required, and identification was verified. With each step, Sarah felt a growing sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. She shouldn't be here, signing away her future on a sterile banking form. Miss Albright slid a final paper across the desk. It was the wire transfer authorization. Sarah stared at the empty line where she was supposed to write her brother's name and account number. Her hand trembled as she filled it in. Thomas J. Miller. The name of the boy she'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager she'd helped with his homework, the man who was now taking everything from her. As she wrote the final digit of the amount, $10,000.00, her vision blurred. She was signing a confession of defeat. Her dream was officially over, at least for the foreseeable future. "All right," Miss Albright said gently, taking the form. "This will be processed immediately. The funds should appear in his account within the hour." Sarah could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. She stood up, mumbled a thank you, and walked out of the bank, feeling a decade older than when she had walked in. The world outside seemed cruelly bright and sunny now. She got into her car and just sat there for a long moment, the silence amplifying the frantic, screaming voice in her head. "What have you done?" She pulled out her phone and with numb fingers texted Tom. "The money has been sent. It should be in your account soon." Her phone buzzed with a reply, almost instantly. The speed of it was a small comfort. Tom, you're a lifesaver, Sarah. I owe you big time. Can't talk now. Dealing with the landlord from hell. We'll call you tonight. Seriously, you saved me. Reading the text, she allowed herself a small, fragile flicker of relief. It was done. She had swooped in and saved her brother just like a big sister was supposed to. The loss was immense, catastrophic even, but she had prevented a worse catastrophe from befalling Tom. That had to be worth something. It had to be. That evening, she tried to distract herself, grading papers with a furious intensity, but her mind kept wandering. The phone call from Tom never came. She told herself he was busy, exhausted from the stress and the move. It was understandable. She sent him a text around 9. Hope everything's okay. Let me know you're settled. An hour later, a reply came back. Tom, all good. Landlord is off my back. So wiped from moving boxes. Talk tomorrow. Night. The cheerful, almost breezy tone felt off. It lacked the gravitas she expected from someone who had been on the verge of homelessness just 24 hours ago. But she squashed the doubt as soon as it surfaced. She was projecting. She was the one who felt the weight of the sacrifice. For him, it was simply a crisis averted. He was probably just relieved and exhausted. She had to give him space. She had done the right thing. She clung to that belief like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood, floating in the vast, empty ocean that was once her savings account. The first few days after the transfer were a strange, hollow limbo. Sarah went through the motions of her life, teaching, grading, lesson planning, with a detached, robotic efficiency. She felt as though she were watching herself from a great distance, a character in a play whose script she didn't enjoy. The financial reality of her sacrifice was a constant, dull ache in the background of her thoughts. Every time she bought groceries or paid a bill, she was acutely aware of the vanished cushion in her bank account. The dream of home ownership wasn't just on hold, it felt like a fantasy she had once foolishly entertained. On Friday, the day Tom had claimed was his absolute deadline to vacate his old apartment, Sarah's anxiety spiked. She had played the hero, provided the funds, and now she needed the closure of knowing her sacrifice had not been in vain. She needed to hear that he was safe, that the landlord was paid, and that he was moving into his new, cheaper studio. It was the validation she desperately needed to justify the gaping hole in her finances. She called him around noon, during her lunch break. The call went straight to voicemail. Hey Tom, just checking in. Hope the move is going smoothly and that everything got sorted with the old landlord. Give me a call when you get a chance. Just want to know you're okay. Love you. Hours ticked by with no response. She checked her phone between classes, a nervous habit she couldn't shake. Nothing. As she drove home from school, her mind concocted a dozen scenarios. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he was in a U-Haul truck, stuck in traffic, unable to answer. Maybe the whole ordeal had been so traumatic that he just needed to shut the world out for a day. Her phone finally buzzed late that evening as she was washing dishes. It was a text, not a call. Tom. Hey, so sorry, crazy day. Move was a beast. All good though. Landlord is paid and off my back. I'm in the new place. Still surrounded by boxes. Super busy, but we'll call this weekend, promise. Thanks again. You're the best. The cascade of exclamation points and the breezy tone did little to soothe her. It felt deflective, superficial. I'm in the new place. Where was the new place? How was it? Was he okay? The details were conspicuously absent. But the message contained the two key pieces of information she needed. Landlord paid, crisis averted. She forced herself to accept it. He was busy. He was overwhelmed. She had to stop being so needy. The promised weekend call, however, never materialized. Sarah's Saturday was a long, anxious stretch of waiting. She cleaned her apartment, went for a run, and graded papers, but her phone was never far from her hand, a constant source of hope and disappointment. She called him once in the afternoon, but again, it went to voicemail. She didn't leave another message. On Sunday evening, another text arrived. Tom. OMG, Sar, so sorry. This weekend was insane. Unpacking is killing me. Totally exhausted. Can we catch up this week? I promise I'll call. The unease was no longer a quiet hum in the back of her mind. It was a blaring alarm. Something was wrong. The excuses were becoming flimsy, the avoidance more pronounced. The grateful, desperate brother on the phone had been replaced by a vague, distant stranger, communicating through cheerful, empty texts. On Monday, Sarah decided to confide in her closest friend, Chloe, a fellow teacher with a sharp wit and a no-nonsense attitude. They met for coffee after school, and as Sarah recounted the story, starting with the frantic phone call and ending with the string of evasive texts, she saw Chloe's expression shift from sympathy to deep skepticism. "Wait, let me get this straight," Chloe said, setting her mug down with a decisive click. "You called you crying about being evicted. You drain your entire house fund, and now he can't even be bothered to pick up the phone and have a real conversation with you?" "He says he's busy moving," Sarah said, hearing the weakness of the excuse even as she voiced it. Chloe raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Sarah, he's your brother. You just saved him from being homeless, according to his story. Busy doesn't cut it. A person in that situation would be calling you every day, overflowing with gratitude. They wouldn't be sending you texts that sound like they were written by a PR intern." "I know it's weird," Sarah admitted, stirring her latte until it was a formless swirl of brown and white. "But what else could it be? He sounded so terrified. I heard him crying." "He's always been a good performer," Chloe said gently but without apology. "Remember that time in college he convinced your parents he needed money for a rare textbook that turned out to be front-row tickets to a concert? You're a kind, trusting person, Sarah, and he knows that. He knows exactly which buttons to push." Sarah felt a flush of defensiveness. He wouldn't lie about something like this. Eviction? Homelessness? That's too cruel. "Is it?" Chloe countered, her gaze unwavering. "We're talking about $10,000. For some people, that's more than enough motivation to be cruel. I'm just saying, be careful. The fact that he's avoiding you now after he got what he wanted, that's a massive red flag." Chloe's words echoed in Sarah's mind for the rest of the evening. She reread Tom's texts, and with this new lens of suspicion, the cheerful exclamation points seemed less like enthusiasm and more like calculated diversions. The breezy sign-offs felt like a way to shut down any further inquiry. She was being managed. The knot of dread in her stomach tightened. She had sacrificed her biggest dream for him, willingly and without hesitation, because she believed he was in trouble. But as the silence from his end grew louder, a horrifying new possibility began to take shape in her mind. It wasn't just a crisis he was hiding from, it was the truth. And she had a sinking feeling that the truth was something far uglier than a simple eviction notice. A full week had passed since the transfer, a week of hollow platitudes and digital silence. Sarah's anxiety had sharpened into a cold, hard stone of dread in her stomach. Every unanswered call and breezy, deflective text had chipped away at her belief in Tom's story, leaving behind a terrifying void of doubt. She found herself caught in a miserable loop, replaying their phone call in her head, searching for the tells she must have missed, the cracks in his performance her love and worry had papered over. It was Thursday evening, a night she usually dedicated to relaxing with a book or a movie, a small reward for surviving another week of teenagers and historical minutiae. But tonight, relaxation was impossible. The silence in her apartment felt heavy, accusatory. She couldn't focus on a book. The plot of any movie seemed trivial compared to the mystery consuming her own life. So she did what millions of restless, anxious people do. She opened her phone and began to scroll. A mindless descent into the curated lives of others. Engagement announcements, baby photos, vacation snapshots. It was a digital anesthetic, a temporary distraction from the gnawing unease. She scrolled through Instagram, her thumb swiping up in a steady, monotonous rhythm. A photo of a former student's dog, a recipe for one-pan chicken, A post from Mark, one of Tom's old college friends. She almost swiped past it, but the bright, garish colors caught her eye. It was a group photo. 5 or 6 guys grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders. And there, right in the center, was Tom. Sarah's thumb froze mid-swipe. Her entire body went rigid. It was him, unmistakably. But it wasn't the Tom she had been picturing all week, a stressed, exhausted young man surrounded by cardboard boxes in a cramped new studio. No, this Tom was tan. He was wearing a ridiculously loud Hawaiian shirt, unbuttoned to reveal a sliver of his chest. His hair was slicked back, and a pair of expensive-looking sunglasses was perched on his head. He was holding a tall, frosty-looking cocktail, a vibrant shade of blue, complete with a pineapple wedge and a tiny paper umbrella. And behind him, stretching out to the horizon, was an expanse of impossibly turquoise water, meeting a brilliant, cloudless sky. He was standing on the deck of a ship, a massive, gleaming white cruise ship. A roaring sound filled his ears, like the rushing of the ocean in the photo. It couldn't be. It had to be an old photo, a throwback. Her mind scrambled for a logical explanation, a lifeline to cling to. Then she read the caption. Bahama Mamas with the boys. So glad @Tom the Creator could make it. Living the best life. The words blurred. Her breath hitched in her chest. The phone felt slick in her suddenly sweaty palm. @Tom the Creator. It was his handle. Her finger, trembling, tapped the tag. It led directly to Tom's own very private Instagram profile. And then she tapped on Mark's profile, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Mark's profile wasn't private, and he had posted more photos. So many more. The next few minutes were a descent into a surreal, sun-drenched nightmare. There was Tom, mid-cannonball, splashing into a sprawling pool on the ship's Lido deck. There was Tom posing with a life-size costumed pirate, his arm thrown around the mascot with a goofy, carefree grin. There was a short video clip, Tom at a crowded, pulsating nightclub on board, laughing as someone poured champagne directly from a bottle into his friend's mouth. The background was a blur of neon lights and dancing bodies. And then she saw the dates. The first photo was posted 5 days ago, the day after she had sent him the money, the day he was supposedly hauling boxes and dodging a shark landlord. The air left her lungs in a silent whoosh. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. She stared blankly at the wall, her mind struggling to process the enormity of the betrayal. It was all a lie. Every single word. The frantic phone call, the sob story about the client, the eviction notice, the desperate search for a new apartment. It was a fabrication, a meticulously crafted, brilliantly performed piece of fiction, designed for one purpose: to swindle her own sister out of her life savings. The $10,000 hadn't gone to a landlord, it had gone to a travel agent. Her down payment, her future, her dream had been converted into a cruise ticket, an open bar tab, and a week of living the best life in the Bahamas. The initial shock was a wave of pure, cold nausea. She felt physically ill, a profound sickness that started in the pit of her stomach and spread through her entire body. She thought of herself at the bank, the earnest conversation with Ms. Albright, the trembling hand signing the transfer form. She had been a fool, a blind, naive, trusting fool. The sickness slowly receded, and in its place something else began to rise. It was hot and sharp and tasted like acid. It was rage, a pure, unadulterated fury, like anything she had ever felt in her life. This wasn't just a lie, it was a violation. He had taken her love, her trust, her sisterly devotion,
and he had weaponized it against her. He had exploited her goodness for his own selfish, trivial pleasure. She picked up the phone, her hands no longer shaking, but steady with a cold, terrifying resolve. She scrolled back to the picture of him on the deck, grinning with his stupid blue drink. She zoomed in on his face, the carefree smile, the relaxed posture. He wasn't just on vacation. He was celebrating his victory. He had pulled it off. He had gotten away with it. A low, guttural sound escaped her lips. He hadn't just stolen her money. He had stolen her image of him, of their family, of the bond she thought was unbreakable. He had shattered it all, and he had done it with the smile, a cocktail in his hand, under the warm Bahamian sun. The fury coursing through Sarah's veins was a powerful, clarifying force. It burned away the last vestiges of her doubt, sadness, and self-pity, leaving behind only the cold, hard certainty of betrayal. She wasn't just going to confront Tom, she was going to demand an answer. She navigated to his contact information, her thumb hovering over the call button. He was still on that ship, surrounded by the evidence of his crime. There would be no escape. She pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, then a third time. She imagined him on a sun lounger, annoyed at the interruption. On the fourth ring, he answered, his voice thick with laziness and irritation. "Hello? What's up, Sar? I'm kinda busy right now." In the background, she could hear the faint, tinny sound of steel drum music and the indistinct chatter of a crowd, the sound of his best life. Sarah's own voice, when she spoke, was dangerously quiet, stripped of all emotion. "Where are you, Tom?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Just out. With some friends," he said, the lie flimsy and pathetic. "It's really loud here. Can I call you back?" "Don't bother lying," she said, the words as sharp and cold as ice chips. "It's a little late for that. I'll ask you again. Where are you?" She heard him sigh, a long put-upon sound of a man being inconvenienced. "Look, what is this about?" "A friend of yours, Mark, posted some photos online," she stated. "Lovely photos. They look very tropical." The silence on the other end was deafening. The steel drum music seemed to falter. She had him. He was caught. When he finally spoke, the lazy annoyance was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive tone. The mask was off. "Look, Sar, it's not what you think," he began, the classic opening line of a guilty man. "Oh, I think I know exactly what it is. I think it's my $10,000 buying you a Bahama Mama on the Lido deck of a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Am I close?" He didn't deny it. The time for lies was over. Now came the time for rationalizations. "Okay, fine. I'm on a cruise. But you're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" Sarah's laugh was a harsh, bitter sound. "I thought you were being evicted. I thought you were going to be homeless. I emptied my life savings for you, Tom. The money I've been saving for 5 years to buy a home." "And I appreciate that," he said, his voice rising with a preposterous note of indignation, as if he were the victim here. "I was having a breakdown, Sarah, a complete mental collapse. That client backing out was real, and the stress, it was killing me. I had to get away. I needed a mental health break. This was a necessity." The sheer audacity of the statement left Sarah speechless for a second. He was trying to frame his luxurious, sun-soaked vacation as a form of therapy, a medical expense for his fragile psyche. "A mental health break?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief and contempt. "You told me you were being thrown out on the street. You cried. You used Dad's memory to manipulate me." "I was emotional," he shot back. "And I am going to pay you back. I told you I would. You just need to chill out. It's not that big of a deal. The money is just sitting in your bank account anyway. At least this way it's doing some good, helping me get my head on straight." He was gaslighting her, minimizing her sacrifice, recasting his theft as a righteous act of self-care. The disconnect from reality was staggering. He genuinely seemed to believe his own twisted logic. Not a big deal. Sarah's voice rose, the icy calm finally cracking. It was my future, Tom. A future you stole to go on a floating booze fest with your idiot friends. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to my finances, but to us. To my ability to ever trust you again. Oh, don't be so dramatic, he scoffed. It's just money. I'll get another big project when I get back. I'll pay you back. Eventually. Eventually. The word was the final, fatal blow. It was a casual, dismissive wave of the hand. It meant nothing. It was a promise with no deadline, no intention, no substance. It was the confirmation that in his mind, her sacrifice was a minor inconvenience he might get around to rectifying someday if it suited him. A profound, chilling clarity washed over Sarah. The brother she knew or thought she knew was gone. In his place was a stranger, a selfish, manipulative narcissist who saw her not as a sister, but as a resource to be exploited. The hurt she had felt was now completely eclipsed by a cold, hard resolve. "Listen to me very carefully, Tom," she said, her voice dropping back to that dangerously quiet tone. "This isn't over. You didn't just borrow money from me. You stole it, under false pretenses, and you are going to pay me back. Not eventually, now." Yeah, whatever, he said, clearly bored with the conversation. The steel drum music swelled in the background. He hung up on her to go join a conga line. The triviality of it was almost comical in its cruelty. She looked down at her hands. They were clenched into tight fists, her knuckles white. He thought this was over. He thought he could charm and deflect his way out of this, like he always did. But he was wrong. This time was different. She was different. The conga line wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of a war.
The drive to her parents' house on Saturday felt like a journey to a foreign country. The familiar suburban streets, the manicured lawns, the comforting saneness of it all seemed to belong to a different life, a life before her world had been fractured by Tom's betrayal. Sarah clutched the steering wheel, her resolve a brittle shield against the hurt and anger that churned within her. She needed her parents. She needed them to see the situation with the same moral clarity she did. She needed them to be on her side, to be as outraged as she was. She needed them to be parents. She found them in the backyard, her father, David, tending to his meticulously pruned rose bushes, and her mother, Helen, reading a novel on the porch swing. They greeted her with warm smiles and hugs, the picture of idyllic parental bliss. "Sarah, honey, what a nice surprise," Helen said, patting the seat next to her. Sarah couldn't bring herself to sit. She stood before them, a prosecutor about to present her case. "I need to talk to you both," she said, her voice tight. "It's about Tom." Their smiles faded, replaced by the familiar, weary expressions they always wore when Tom was the topic of conversation. She laid it all out, her words precise and methodical. She started with the frantic late-night phone call, describing the feigned panic and the story of his eviction. She told them about emptying her savings account, the full $10,000. Then she pulled out her phone. "This is where he was when he was supposed to be moving," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she showed them the first photo. Tom, grinning on the cruise ship, cocktail in hand. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David took the phone from Sarah, his face grim as he swiped through the other pictures. The pool, the nightclub, the general atmosphere of carefree debauchery funded by his daughter's stolen future. "Oh my God," Helen whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "I don't believe it. How could he?" David handed the phone back, a muscle twitching in his jaw. That foolish, selfish boy, after everything. For a moment, Sarah felt a wave of relief. They saw it. They understood. The validation was a soothing balm on her raw emotions. They were her allies. But then, the dynamic began to shift. It was subtle at first. After the initial shock wore off, Helen's expression softened from horror to a pained, maternal pity. "He must have been so desperate to do something like that," she sighed, wringing her hands.
He's been under so much stress lately with his work being so unstable, he probably just snapped. Snapped? Mom, he didn't snap. He planned this. He constructed an elaborate lie and performed it for me. This was premeditated. Well, premeditated is such a strong word. He's just young and impulsive. He doesn't think about the consequences. You know how he is. He's 28 years old, Sarah countered, her voice rising. That's not young and impulsive. That's a grown man who is a pathological liar and a thief. Sarah, please don't use that kind of language about your brother, David interjected, his tone shifting from anger at Tom to a placating one directed at her. He made a terrible mistake, there's no doubt, but we're a family. We don't turn on each other. The foundation of Sarah's relief began to crumble. They weren't her allies. They were his defenders. They were already reframing the narrative, softening the edges of his crime, transforming him into a victim of his own flawed but ultimately forgivable character. He promised he would pay you back, didn't he? He has good intentions. He said eventually, Mom, and he hung up on me to go join a conga line. Those are not the actions of someone with good intentions. It's the money, isn't it? David said, his expression troubled. Look, we can help. We can't give you the whole $10,000 right now, but we can give you some of it to help you get back on your feet. It was a second betrayal, deeper and more painful than the first. They thought her outrage was about the money. They didn't understand that the money was just a symbol of the real crime, the absolute destruction of trust. They were offering to patch the financial hole, hoping it would make the entire ugly situation just go away. They wanted to restore the peace, even if it meant ignoring the injustice. This isn't about the money anymore, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, steady tone. It's about the fact that he thinks this is okay. It's about accountability. For years, you've both made excuses for him. You've bailed him out, cleaned up his messes, and enabled his behavior. And this is the result, a man who feels so entitled that he can steal his own sister's future without a shred of remorse. We're not enabling him, Helen said, her eyes welling with tears. We love him. We're his parents. And I'm his sister and your daughter. Sarah finally broke, the pain overwhelming the anger. Don't I matter? Doesn't what he did to me matter more than protecting him from the consequences of his own actions? They looked at her, their faces etched with pain and conflict. They were caught between their delinquent son and their wounded daughter, and their instinct was to smooth things over, to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy family. Please, Sarah, David pleaded, don't make a bigger deal out of this. Let us talk to him when he gets back. We'll handle it. Just keep it in the family. In that moment, Sarah saw everything with a painful, crystalline clarity. She was on her own. Her parents, in their misguided love for their son, would never be able to give her the justice she deserved. They would scold him, express their disappointment, and then they would forgive him, because that was easier than holding him truly accountable. I love you both, she said, her voice steady again. But I can't let this go. If I do, he will never learn. And I will never respect myself. She turned and walked away, leaving them on the porch, their faces a mixture of sorrow and helplessness. She got in her car, and as she drove away from the home she grew up in, she didn't feel angry anymore. She just felt a profound, lonely sense of resolve. The family she thought she had, the one that would rally around her in a crisis, was an illusion. If she wanted justice, she would have to get it for herself. And she would. The weekend at her parents' house had been a crucible, forging Sarah's grief and anger into something sharp, clear, and unbreakable. Purpose. She had no allies in her family, but she had something more powerful, the truth, and she was going to use it. On Monday morning, she called her school and took a personal day, the excuse of a family matter feeling like a bitter understatement. Her first stop wasn't a lawyer's office, but the local county courthouse. The building was imposing, but inside, the small claims division was surprisingly accessible, designed for ordinary people seeking ordinary justice. She spoke to a clerk, a kind, middle-aged woman who listened patiently to the condensed version of Sarah's story and nodded sympathetically. She explained the process: a simple form, a modest filing fee, and the requirement of serving the defendant with the summons. The monetary limit for small claims court was exactly $10,000. It was perfect. Sitting on a hard wooden bench in the courthouse hallway, Sarah meticulously filled out the paperwork. She felt a strange sense of empowerment with each line she completed. Plaintiff, Sarah Miller. Defendant, Thomas J. Miller. Documenting the cold, hard facts, the date of the transfer, the amount, the false pretenses of an eviction emergency, felt like reclaiming her narrative. This was no longer just a messy family drama. It was a legal complaint, a matter of public record. She gathered her evidence, organizing it with the precision of a history teacher preparing a lecture. She printed the bank statement showing the $10,000 wire transfer. She took high-quality screenshots of the text messages, from his initial panicked pleas to his breezy, dismissive excuses. And most damningly, she printed glossy color copies of Mark's social media posts, Tom on the cruise ship, his carefree grin a portrait of deceit, the timestamps a clear indictment of his lies. She arranged it all in a neat, professional-looking folder. A few days later, a process server delivered the court summons to Tom, who had just returned from his mental health break, tanned and rested. His reaction was immediate and explosive. He called Sarah, not with a hint of remorse, but pure, unadulterated rage. "Are you insane?" he screamed into the phone, his voice a far cry from the pathetic whimper he'd heard just 2 weeks earlier. "You're suing me? Your own brother? What is wrong with you?" Sarah listened calmly, holding the phone slightly away from her ear. "There's nothing wrong with me, Tom. I lent you money for an emergency that didn't exist. I want it back. It's that simple." "I told you I'd pay you back. This is going to ruin my reputation. You're trying to destroy my life over a stupid loan." "It stopped being a loan the moment you lied to me," she said, her voice unwavering. "If you want this to go away, transfer the $10,000 back into my account. Otherwise, I'll see you in court." She hung up before he could respond. Next came the call from her parents, their voices fraught with panic and shame. They begged her to drop the lawsuit, to not air their dirty laundry in public. Sarah held firm. "This is not your laundry," she told them gently but firmly. "This is between Tom and me. He is the one choosing to let this happen by not paying me back." In the weeks leading up to the court date, Tom's arrogance delivered Sarah her final piece of evidence. He bought a car. Not a sensible sedan, but a flashy, cherry-red, used convertible sports car. He posted a photo of himself on social media, leaning against the hood with a triumphant smirk, captioning it, "New whip, time to grind." He had money. He had money for a completely unnecessary, ego-driven purchase. He just didn't have money for the sister whose dream he had torched. Sarah printed the photo and added it to her file. The day of the hearing arrived. Sarah dressed in a simple, professional blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked like what she was, a sensible, credible teacher. Tom arrived just moments before the case was called, dressed in ripped designer jeans and a t-shirt, looking sullen and annoyed. He had no lawyer, clearly believing his charm and a convoluted story about a misunderstanding would be enough. When the judge called their names, they stood before the bench. The room was small and unpretentious. The judge, an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked over the file. "Miss Miller," she said, "please state your case." Sarah spoke clearly and concisely. She presented her timeline, her voice never wavering. She showed the judge the bank transfer, the desperate text from Tom, and then the cruise ship photos. She concluded by presenting the picture of his new car. "Your Honor," she finished, "my brother obtained $10,000 from me under the false pretense of an imminent eviction. He used that money, my entire savings for a down payment on a home, to go on a luxury vacation. Upon his return, instead of making any effort to repay me, he purchased this sports car. I'm asking the court to order the full repayment of the funds he took from me." The judge looked at Tom, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller, your response?" Tom stammered, his usual swagger completely gone under the judge's stern gaze. "It was a loan, Your Honor, a family loan. I was stressed. I needed a break. I told her I'd pay her back. She's overreacting and trying to embarrass me." The judge looked down at the photo of Tom on the cruise ship, then at the photo of him with his new car. She looked back at Tom, her gaze piercing. "A break that was funded by a lie about being made homeless?" the judge asked, her voice dangerously soft. "And this vehicle, it seems your financial distress was remarkably short-lived." The verdict was swift and decisive. The evidence was irrefutable. The judge ruled in Sarah's favor, awarding her the full $10,000, plus her court filing fees. She looked directly at Tom. "This was not a loan, Mr. Miller. This was a textbook case of fraudulent misrepresentation. The judgment is to be paid in full within 60 days. Defeated and humiliated, Tom was forced to sell the sports car. A week later, a silent, anonymous bank transfer appeared in Sarah's account. $10,150. There was no text, no call, no apology. The relationship with her brother was a crater. The one with her parents, a fractured, delicate thing that might never fully heal. But as Sarah sat at her computer that evening, she wasn't thinking about them. She pulled up the real estate listings, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had lost a brother she never really had, but she had gained something far more valuable, the undeniable knowledge of her own strength and self-worth. The dream of a home was alive again, and this time she would build it herself on a foundation no one could ever take from her again.